Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bob Griffin, and I'm here to introduce my friend, John Schwantes, and to give you an introduction to his remarkable story, or I should say stories, most notably surrounding his experience in what is known as the Battle of the Bulge. The Battle of the Bulge during World War II. See if I can get these things to work. Hang on. Oops. Oops.
Don't anyone get nervous. I think I'm going to be electrocuted with all, right? Pardon me?
Yeah.
I know it, I know it.
Technical difficulty. All right. Fun.
Got it.
But first, I want to point out that here at V, we have 88 residents, more or less, 88, who are veterans of the armed forces. How many of you are here today? How many of you are veterans? A good number, a good number. Today's program is our thank you to you. I got to know John a couple of years ago while working with the art committee on an exhibit of World War II memorabilia. Some of you may remember it was very popular. John was one of only 4 living residents then who took part in World War II. He is today the only one. John joined the Army in March of 1944 when he was only 17. He was initially assigned to a specialized training program in Lansing, Michigan, until he turned 18. After training, we can do.
An axe is needed.
Yeah, for sure. I'm sorry. This is important. Renee, help. Wait. Yeah. All right. Well, you'll have to live with all of the other stuff. Anyway, after training, he was shipped out for duty. Excuse me, after training, he was assigned to the 3rd Armored Division of the 1st Army. And in mid-November, he was shipped out for duty in France and Belgium. This map is from a larger one that hangs in John's apartment. It traces the route of the 3rd Armored Division, known as the spearhead of the 1st Army. It began with the landing on Omaha Beach in Normandy. Okay. It's a little bit further over here, a little bit off of that slide, but proceeds, this is the route they took, proceeds through France, south of Paris, up into Belgium. crossed the Seine south of Paris in mid-August. They fought their way into Belgium, overtaking remnants of the fleeing enemy before eventually crossing the so-called Siegfried Line, which was roughly the western border of Germany. Let's see it here. The Allies eventually were able to push the Germans behind the Siegfried Line as they continued to inch their way, literally inching their way into Germany, sometimes advancing only 1,000 yards in a day. Finally, crossing the Ruhr River on December 12th, 1944. A month later, it's important. Oop. There we go. A month later, on December 16th, Hitler launched his massive counteroffensive known as the Battle of the Bulge. You can see the beginning of what was the Bulge is right here. So they a month later, on December 16th, as I said, Hitler launched it, landing the first wave of what eventually amounted to 410,000 men and more than 1,400 tanks and armored vehicles. That was the German strength, greatly outnumbering the Americans at that point. As I said, here you can begin to see the bulge of the German line as their troops pushed back into Belgium. Initially, the Germans focused on the Belgian city of Bastogne, well to the west and well behind the American troops, forcing the Americans to turn back to retake and defend territory they had previously secured. All this was taking place, of course, in December during a series of winter snowstorms and brutal cold. Quick action by the Americans and the arrival of Patton's Third Army ended the siege of Bastogne. And by the end of December, the German offensive was effectively broken, although the battle continued for another month before the front line was restored to its position prior to the attack. And John and his men returned to their old battleground near Stolberg, Germany, and prepared for attack across the Ruhr River. With that as background, now I'm honored to turn this over to John for his, someone has their mic on? All right, I'm about to turn this over to John for his first-person account of what happened. But before I do, those of you who know John know that he won't want to talk about the bad stuff, as he calls it. But John was serving in a war, and sometimes it's important to talk about the bad stuff. But first, let's have some fun stuff.
Okay.
You're on.
Hey, we got the technical stuff licked and we're here. I told Joe Matthews that 4 people would show up for this thing. I don't know which 4 of you are here, but we're glad to see you. I hope this meets with your recommendations because many of you have talked to me about this. One of the things you have to remember is anytime you're speaking, you have to be a little careful. It always reminds me of the time when we used to speak in large areas. So you talked in churches, and the guy who was ahead of you would talk from the altar, and then he'd move back and you'd get up and walk past him. In my experience walking past one of my old friends, he said to me while I'm on my way to the altar to speak, he said, "Your fly is open." You are suddenly in dead trouble. Now, how do you turn around? And well, anyway, it's just one of those things. But first of all, we have to get there. So I've been through all this training and all this stuff we're talking about. All we're going to talk about today are people and events. I can't remember what day it was, what time it was. Some of us I have a clock now that says it's Saturday and it's February 42nd or whatever it is, and away we go. Well, that's okay because you remember the things you did with people. And frankly, the first thing is you got to get there. And we're in New Jersey, of all places, with our regiment. And we had about, must have been 4,000 people that were lined up to get on this ship. And we waited and we waited. And obviously when this thing, the Battle of the Bulge turned tough, they said, okay, send lots of people. And we raced for the harbor. And here is this gigantic ship. It was the Queen Mary, for heaven's sakes. And all the names had been taken off and it was kind of beat up. It was rusty and it had been running back and forth across the Atlantic in 8 to 9 days for weeks, bringing 4,000 people at a time. Well, this new trip that I was going to go on was for primarily doctors and nurses, and almost 1,000 of them on the upper decks. And we didn't get to see that, of course. They marched us in, and there's a guy at the top of the staircase, and he says to you, go down one more. There's another guy down on the next layer, and he says, go down one more. And on 6 times. We were in the basement of the ship, if there is such a thing. And did it ever stink? It had been shipping people back and forth over. My only hope was to get out of there somehow. The next morning, I walked past on the way to breakfast. Breakfast, that's a joke, but anyway, I walked past this billboard, and on there is a little sign that said, we're auditioning for a dance band on the top floor this afternoon at 12 to 4 o'clock. It took me about 2 minutes to rush back and get myself ready and run up the stairs for this audition. And it was, my goodness, there was a piano player there. There was a guy with a guitar. There's a big gentleman with a bass. And I walk in and I figured, I played the drums a little bit in high school, and I'll be a drummer. There were 3 guys there to be drummers, and they auditioned them. The first guy was a guy that played Philip Sousa, bang, bang, bang. He was ready to go marching, not for band. The second guy got up, and I think he was a little stoned. He fell on the way to the band and got up, and I was in practically. But we had a lovely lady who was a singer, Ellen, and she was very good, and she was a nurse, but she loved to sing. So we said, when it came to be my turn to show off, I said, why don't we just do a tune? You pick a tune that you like, Ellen. And the piano player was the only guy in the place that had any music, printed music. He was great for it. And she picked Stardust of all things. And we set up and they started to play. The piano led. A saxophonist was there and he'd already been picked and he was excellent. So Ellen started to sing and I'm brushing the drums carefully with the brushes and it went very well. She said, okay, what else should we sing? And she had all these swing numbers, you know, Amapolo, Sentimental Journey, all the stuff you folks would remember, right? Anybody remember that? Yeah, yeah, it's our life, you know. Anyway, for 8 days, we went through, we started 4 o'clock. I talked to the major who was running the joint. And I said, we got to have training. We have to work for an hour in the afternoon, 4 o'clock. He said, do it right here in the dining room. And after that, we have to eat. Well, you go to the kitchen, their kitchen for the doctors and nurses, and we have a lovely dinner. We thought that was great. And then at 6 o'clock, we would start playing. And she would go through a set of numbers. She sang in 2 or 3 of them. And we had this guitarist who just loved to play country music, except he told jokes all the way through. And one of the jokes that he loved the best is, how did I lose all of my love life just because I said I do? At 18, I didn't really understand that. Anyway, we got through this period. We had a great time. And we said, gee, it's going to end because we're coming close to Le Havre and going to get out of the ship. And it was great. And we finally had a last showing. And we all sang, good night, ladies, good night, gentlemen. You know the old song? Anybody remember that one? Yeah, it was kind of fun. And they were great. And we all said goodbye. And this Ellen, the singer, came up to me, kissed me on the forehead, and she said, I appreciate it. You got us into dinner. You got us all playing together so well. And it was a great event. She said, I only have to tell you one thing. She leaned forward to me carefully and she said, you're the worst damn drummer I ever heard in my life. Now that'll take your socks off when you're going. Yeah, right. She was a great gal, but she was doing fine. Well, this afternoon, what we're going to do is first I'm going to talk about the Battle of the Bulge. And I don't stand worth a darn, so I'm going to sit down a couple of times and get up again. So brace yourself. This is going to change a little bit. But there were all kinds of things that happened, some good and some bad. One of them is before I even got down there, I had to go through training. And at that time, they announced that when the Germans went through, their leader, Colonel Piper, said to his troops, you captured a number of prisoners. We cannot take them on this invasion that we're heading for Antwerp, of all places. And we're going to have to dispose of them. And you know what happened? 2 trucks appeared, 248 GIs were machine gunned on a field next door to Manhay, where we were heading after our training. And you know how they discovered them? A tank ran through that field and ran over several bodies. Now there was a foot of snow there, but when you run over a body that's frozen, it's been there a week, and you run over the lower part of the body lifts up onto the snow. These guys were petrified. And that's how they discovered 250 people shot. That brought out rule. We do not want any prisoners. And the US Army put that in print, sent it to all of us. What are we going to do about prisoners? Well, we still captured a number, but many of them were shot as prisoners by our US Army. That's war. That's what happens. The act of killing people becomes tough. Frankly, I was involved with 9 days where we didn't have a hot meal. It was frozen over, and we were eating K rations and what they call 10-in-1 boxes. 10 men get 1 meal out of that box. And there was beautiful things in there, Spam. And I'm not talking about the stuff you get over your telephone, you know, Spam. And let's see, Vienna wieners. Have you ever heard of those?
Oh, of course.
Good Lord. I lived on those things. I've never had one since. So anyhow, you do these things, and it was green beans and a lot of things that were very good for you. And we progressed well. We made it through the 9 days. At that point, this is another bad one. We ran into what they called the Hitler Jugend, Jugend, the division for 14 to 17-year-old students. And it was a division of something like 14,000 kids. What do you do in the morning, Al? You get up and you have to go to the bathroom. Well, the bathroom is over in the woods here, you know, about 50 yards away. So I trudge on over there with my rifle. We were supposed to carry a gun all the time. Walked over to the bathroom and did my thing and came back. And the machine gunner on the side of us was shouting, and shooting. And so something was going on. So I walked into the main area where the boys were trying to start a fire, 2 guys trying to get a fire going. And I see 2 guys, German and a sergeant, coming in and started shooting at them and shot at me. Somebody picked up a rifle and shot them both. 3 bullets in the chest on the big guy. The sergeant got hit in the face, down. They were the leaders of the division as it came through. They only had about 12 men with them, and the 2 leaders were dead. And unfortunately, 6 of the kids were shot by the machine gunners. I got caught the dickens for that, because they wanted to interview this guy who had been sent from Berlin by Hitler to get these kids out of the battle in Bastogne and take them back to Berlin for his, I don't know, birthday ceremony or something. He was going to award prizes and medals to all these kids. The leaders didn't make it. The unhappiness came from the intelligence group who wanted to interview this guy. Well, my friend, Sergeant Dan, finally called him up and said, "Why don't you idiots come down here when the shooting is going on, and you can help yourself to any interviews you want to get. They may not be live ones, but you can interview them all day long," which they did. They picked up the 2 guys and they picked up the 6 kids and took them back. So at that point, we were concerned about what we're going to do, and happy about it. And no, not really. Shooting people is not really an ideal situation. Finally, I have to tell you about one of the better things in my travels. I find that people in all these circumstances are fine. You can find great people. I was acquainted with a family called Grittley by their father coming and tapping on the tank while I was pouring gasoline into the top of the tank. He's standing down below talking, and the captain came over and said, he wants to take 2 soldiers like you to their home tonight, and they're going to have potato soup and bread, big loaves of bread. Well, the bread sounded wonderful. And he said, okay, you and a friend go. And I did. We had to take a 4-in-1 box, which had in it cigarettes, chewing gum, all the bad things for us, I guess, and this food, which they loved. So we trudged on back to 2 miles, hauled this stuff in, and Mama met us at the door and said, it's been snowing. She didn't say that, but whatever she said in Flemish, I didn't understand, but it was take off your boots. Okay, we took off the boots and handed them to her. She had a new floor in the kitchen, and you're not going to walk on that floor, as you ladies know, with boots on. We got into the place, and they had a daughter who was 20 years old, another daughter who was 13, and Mama and Papa. We were there for the early evening, and while we were there, we heard a missile coming over. And I thought, we stopped, you stop and you listen for it. And when the engine quits, you know it's dropping. That's a V2 missile from Germany. And the V2s were big, a ton of stuff. That thing landed, and the funny part was their family dived under the table. They were used to this thing, popped under the table. And my friend and I, we said, well, we better join them. We got down on the floor under the table. And they said, well, this is kind of cozy down here, but what are we doing? Well, we're waiting for that bomb to fall. It fell 2 miles away in the wooded area and didn't hurt a thing. So we finished our meal, and it got to be really late, like 8 o'clock at night, and we were exhausted. We said, what do we do? And she said, you're going to sleep in the bedroom that's next door to where the barn was. The barn and the house were connected. So they didn't have to get out in the snow. They could walk right next door. And she said, you can sleep in this bed that's back here. Okay, we crawled in all of our clothing and no boots on. And then there was a knock on the wall when she came in, and she had a big package. It was a blanket that was wrapped on something. She brought it in and put it under my feet. We each got a rock, a heated rock for us delivered. And that is the first and last time I ever had warm feet in the Battle of the Bulge. It was just one of those things that impress you. We have, since that time, communicated regularly with them. These are the Christmas cards that we receive from the Grittley family every Christmas. It's a big event, and I still remember them. Louisa has now died, and so has her husband and the children. All 3 of them are gone. But we communicated for 40 years back and forth, just a card. I have never been able to read one. I don't know what they say. They all say Merry Christmas, I think. So our trip through the Battle of the Bulge was tough. It was interesting, and it was dangerous. Now, you've been sitting here for an hour, no, 40 minutes. why don't you all stand up and stretch and get your, and, because I'm going to sit down. It's my turn. Stand up and stretch for 2 minutes, and then we'll go on with the next step, okay? How are we doing? Yeah. We're old, we have to stretch high, don't forget, you know, yeah. No, that was 44. Yeah, 44.
December 44.
Yeah. Okay. Now we can all sit down.
But then, as I understand it, you return to Stolberg
Yes,
en route to Berlin.
at the time after this event, when we got done with the Battle of the Bulge, new equipment was coming in. So we had to go back to Stolberg and Aachen, and where they did the repair on machines and get into new training. And by that time, guess who had moved from a loader to a gunner? Me. You know, I said, it's about time, for crying out loud, you know, but anyway, it was an important change. And I got a lot of time in on the machine, on the guns. The best improvement of this was going from a 75 millimeter artillery piece to a 76. Doesn't sound like much, but all these shells are a little bit bigger. They have more dynamite in them, dynamite, whatever it is. And my job as a loader was always to put all of these armor piercing and high powered ones in separate cases. You had to make sure you're pulling the right one out to fire. And I got another lesson on don't ever push that shell into the cannon with your fingers. You got to turn it and push with the palm of your hand. Otherwise, you can't get your arm out of there fast enough before the guy shoots it. And the recoil will give you a 4-inch arm. And that's very hard on you, as you could imagine. But those are little tricks that they teach you at this time. My problem with the guns were I could see them very well, and I did a good job of hitting across the ravine. We shot trees down for practice and that sort of thing. But that went on for a long time. And finally, now we move to February 26th. It's the day I died. And February 26th.
Talk about the bridge first.
But the what?
Talk about crossing the bridge first.
Yeah, that's coming, yeah. So we had moved from Stolberg and we got into a fight at the border on Düren. And the only funny thing there was that by the time we got to Düren, the Germans had evacuated the city. It was a town of about 60,000 people, and they were all gone. They were out, except there was a large German contingent in the brewery. And they were in the lower level of the brewery, and the windows or the window events were on the front and on the sides that they could shoot out of. They were very happy down in the brewery all the time. The infantry couldn't get them out, and they said, what can you do? Well, I was in the first tank that went through, and they said, let's take a look at it. And we got about a block and a half away so we could see it all. And they said, oh, that's a red brick building. If we shoot the side corner of the building out, shoot out the doorways and each of the windows, maybe the red bricks will all fall down on the front of the building. They had been put on. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. We shot the doorway out to finish it. And when you knock that pin in the Gothic joint, down came the red bricks. And I said, well, that's gonna jam them in. He said, they can go out the back door whenever they sober up, so don't worry about them, they'll be all right. But that brings us to the time we went from Durham to down the Roar River. And the Roar River is coming down from the north, while the Rhine is flowing north the other way. So that land in between, about 50 miles of it, was perfect farmland and used all the time. Well, we were still on the Roar side of the river, and we had to cross over on a bridge. So we drove up to where the crossing was supposed to be, a narrower point for the Roar. And the doggone thing was full of icebergs or ice slots coming down. And we got to the top of the hill, and I looked down looking for the bridge, thinking it'd be a big spire and all that. So it was a pontoon bridge. Now, I said, pardon me, gentlemen, but this is a 30-ton tank, and we're going to go across on this bridge that is held with old ropes, big ropes, cables. It had a mapped floor that you could drive on, and you guys will be perfectly safe. And I said, I don't think so. We don't have a 30-ton tank. We have a 33-ton tank with food, with shells, with everything else we put on this sucker. And it's going to go down like a rock. And oh, don't worry about a thing. We have tested it. And this was the engineering colonel who was standing there. Finally, Sergeant Dan said to me, shut up and let him talk. He explained to us that this was going to be fine, and you guys would be very happy with the way this is going to work. And he said, now don't forget, you're on a little hill, and you're going to go down on this bridge, and it's going to take your tank underwater. The water will come up halfway up on the tank side. And I said, I'll walk if you don't mind. I'll walk ahead. And Dan said, shut up again, the usual. And anyway, we've been on with this thing. But if you go down, you pull that pontoon down, and then you got to come up again to get onto the other side at Goldsheim. We got in, and Dan, as the driver, did very well, and you got to build up a little head of steam so you can make it up the hill. I frankly had to change my underwear when I got up on the other side, but we made it, and everything was.
You were the first ones across.
We were the first one that made it across. The problem was that it wore on the treads. The 10th or 11th, I'm not sure which one, tank to follow us made a mistake. It got off on the side, the tank, and 5 men went into the ditch. And that scared the daylights out of everybody else who was coming. But we finally got 12 tanks across. 5 of them stayed to guard that bridge, which I think probably should have been dynamited anyway. But anyway, we got into attacking Goldsheim, and they just had machine gun nests there. So the fight was between our tank and their machine guns, and that was in our favor. The problem was that was the last time anything that day was in our favor. They told us there were 2 48-millimeter cannons in the town of Blatzheim, which was the next town we're going to go to. And I said, well, we should be able to find those. And no, we couldn't. We moved in, and in the morning, we had 7 tanks. That's a company of tanks in the 3rd Armored Division. And the company moved ahead, and 2 of them got hit in the first hour. So now we're down to 5. We pulled back. We got over on this, we were on the left side where a row of trees went from one city to the next. And we could get into the tree area and get some protection there. And I was convinced that the 88, one of the 88s was in right next to the church in the shrubbery, in all these bushes and plants and trees. And so I kept trying to hit that spot, but it was a little too far for our gun. Gun only would be accurate up to about 600 yards. And theirs were at 1,000. The 88 would be deadly at 1,000 yards. And I shot at that doggone bridge. And finally the guy said, look at the tower on the church. And there was a church tower with the supposed bell in it. The bell was gone, obviously, but there were 2 or 3 guys wandering around on this little walkway around the church, and they said, those are spotters. And we said, oh, we're not supposed to shoot at a church, right? I made a terrible error. I wound up shooting 5 times at the tower. and everybody is hollering, oh, you're doing it, it's getting there, it's all right. And the captain, one of the captains called and said on the radio and said, who's shooting at the church? Oh, I'm not shooting at the church, I'm shooting at the shrubbery right next to the church. Well, we finally dropped the church, top of the church off. And also we had an explosion next to the church, which was where the gun was with its ammunition, and it blew up. Well, that took care of, we're down to 2 88 millimeters and we're down to 5 tanks. The next thing I know, we're headed out in the middle and they got 2 more tanks. They drilled it. Now we're down to 3. Well, that went on in the afternoon, and finally, late in the day at 4 o'clock, we pulled back and I said, we aren't doing any good here. This is really a tough spot. And at that point, we pulled back far enough and we were recounting what we had in shells and this sort of thing. It was a tough day. And I said, why don't we go over there, and we're now down to the only 1 tank, us. Go over next to that burned out tank and we'll figure out what we're going to do. And Sergeant Dan says, yes, that sounds like a good plan. We got over there and next to that tank, and that was a big mistake. Why was it a mistake? Anybody think of a reason? Why was it a mistake? They had already hit that tank, and the Germans knew exactly what it took to hit that tank on that angle. And there we sat like idiots. We made the turn, we were on the side, and all I know exactly what happened. A shell came in on the floor, took my leg off, went to the 2 drivers in the front, exploded, armor piercing, high explosive, so it pierces the tank and blows up inside the tank. The lieutenant on the top blew out on the side. The 2 drivers are gone, and the loader was killed on the same day. I stood up and fell down, no leg on one side. And for some reason, I got hold of the top of the hatch and threw myself out, rolled on the back of on the engine, rolled off in the back and landed in the dirt. And I didn't see anybody else get out. They were all gone, including so our record at that point was, there's 1 guy alive and it's me in the dirt trying to get away from the tank. That doggone leg was bleeding like crazy, as you can imagine, with the leg off. And as we, a friend of mine, Mike, who was a medic, appeared. And he was crying and screaming and hollering and gave me a shot of morphine. And he came back again, he gave me another shot of morphine. I was not in very good shape. And that went on until 6 o'clock. But that was also the start of my morphine addiction. And every time you moved and you were unhappy with yourself, they gave you another shot of morphine, calm you down. Well, I finally got picked up at 6 o'clock. 6 o'clock, it was getting pretty dark by then, but that was a half track that came down to get me. And they went around and they checked people who were alive. And there were 3 of us that were still alive out of that whole contingent. So that's the story of getting out of it. I got back and I was taken to a place that was above a train station. I have no idea where it was, probably Durham, over the train station. And they had, when I woke up at 2 o'clock in the morning, it was 4 lanes of people like me, all with feeders coming in, plasma, blood, whatever, antibiotics. And I woke up at 2 in the morning and I said, I looked around and the guy next to me had a big mat on his chest. And the mat was like rubber and it kept moving. And the nurse saw that I was awake and came down and said, I'll give you some salve for your hands and your face where you have a flash burn. I was red in the face, and the flash burn is when the explosion occurs. You are covered with flames at that point. And she said, I said, oh, how am I doing? But, well, she said, they did surgery on you and you're going to be better. And she said, we're waiting here for the rest of these people. And I said, well, what are you doing? She said, when they die, I have to pick up the dog tags. And I said, what do you do with them? We record everyone. So tomorrow I'll give them to an officer and he can start writing letters to the families that they're dead. And I said, you can't have my dog tags. And she said, right. So anyway, that went on until that night. And that was the end of my February 26th date. I was listed as dead for 3 days in the company records. And that was the beginning of a long recovery period. So we probably should end it there so we got time enough for the questions and answers. Okay. What did I forget? What did I forget?
I think you can talk a little bit about, before we open it up, where you went after that and when you finally got back to the US, where you went for rehab.
Well, this is a longer story because that was February 26, 1944. And I didn't get out of Europe until the middle of March. So what they were doing is deciding whether these guys, me and the rest of them, were going to live and make it. And they decided, since I was 18 and still in pretty good shape, I probably would pull through. So we had any number of places. I got on a train. We had 2, one down low and one up high, gurneys that they strap into the train wall. And they brought me back to Paris. And, you know, I lost all my clothing. They had stripped me and I was running around in what appeared to be a nightgown, and I never got out of bed. And every time I moved, I got another shot of morphine. So that happened. So I finally got to Paris and spent my time there in Paris trying to get pure penicillin. It was ugly stuff at that time. That was yellow, and it seemed unpasteurized, and it burned like the dickens. When they came through the ward to give you a shot of this penicillin, which was a great antibiotic, you know, and I didn't have any infections, but it was a killer to put up with the doggone stuff. It was bad for you. And it worked. It worked. Finally, they decided, okay, I should fly home. Fly home. John Dugan is around here someplace, and he laughs at me because it was a 4-engine plane, and it was reserved only for injured GIs. And the dang thing also had racks of where you could be placed. And he said that plane only went 160 miles an hour. Well, we have cars on the 101 that go faster than 160 miles an hour. So, you know, it was unbelievable. But anyway, I got on these planes. We went from Paris to the Azores, from the Azores to Halifax, from Halifax to all 10,000-foot runways, because this sucker could come floating in like a bird and land. And I got to Halifax and I was in trouble. I was bleeding badly from other wounds in the hips and the back. And the guy below me in the plane was complaining. I don't know what he was complaining. So just because I'm dropping blood on him all the way, you know, this did not go over well with him. But at that time, I was now happy with all the nurses that were taking good care of me. And I finally wound up in a hospital in Bushnell General Hospital up in Brigham City, Utah, of all places. Everybody else was filled, and this was a hospital ready for the people from the Japanese program coming in. So we had, that was where we did the rehab and lots of work on repairing.
How long were you in that hospital? Do you remember?
Well, I finally got out in January of 45. Yeah. But that was, good Lord, almost
I think you met your
9
wife
months,
there.
8 months like that. Yeah.
I think you met your first wife there, right?
Yes. My first wife. Her name was Patricia. And so was the name of my second wife was Patricia. Al told me that was a good trick. You never got in trouble, you know. So anyway, we had.
Well, I was in the 5th Army,
Oh, he was,
but that was during Korea.
oh, Korea. Well, we all had that experience, I guess. But anyway, it's a long time getting in, and I think I met this young lady there where you usually meet. She was a nurse therapist, and Patricia was 1 year older than I was, and she had been in a therapeutic training program for dealing with nurses, of all things. I've told Ellie Fields about this also, but she was very good at the therapy part of it. And Pat would read to people that were sick nurses. I said, where did you get all these nurses? How come they're here on a secluded floor in this hospital that only had ramps? It had absolutely no steps in any level, because old guys with one leg would fall down a lot, you know, that's bad for you. But the problem with this group of ladies up there was, where did they come from? And finally, one day after we had gone to a few movies and that sort of thing, she said, they're all from Corregidor and Baton and other places in the east. And back,
Japanese tortured
Yes,
all of the prisoners that they took in the Philippines.
yeah,
And that included, obviously, this group of nurses who, this
Yeah.
sort of ironically, they worked in a rehab hospital. And
Yeah.
then they came over here and then went into a rehab hospital.
there were probably 20 nurses up there, and she was taking care of or helping them. Therapy was, reading to them, helping them, whatever they needed. And finally, a doctor came down and with her and said to me, would you mind, as a injured soldier, and I still had one leg and wasn't into the prosthesis stuff yet, would you mind taking walks with these ladies? And I said, well, tell me about them. Well, we think they need to be acquainted with a man again and see what happens with them mentally. And I said, well, what are you doing now? Well, the only thing we can do for them is do a shock treatment. If you're familiar with this, it never worked. It was a shock to their system trying to get their brain back to functioning. And I said, well, sure, I'll take them for a walk with Pat, yeah, with Patricia. And so I'll meet you at the door, a double door, door out of their place, and then a door to meet them and get so somebody else didn't run away, you know. And I said, fine. They're going to bring 4. We'll try 4. You walk with 2 of them, and Pat will walk with a couple others. 2 of them were very docile, very quiet, never said a word. They were short people, very quiet, and friends. You could tell they were friends. The other 2, one was 6 feet tall, and the other gal was 5'1". And the little one was really a bitchy one. She was bad. She was really naughty. She kept needling the 6-foot gal. So we start off on this walk, and we go down a long hallway, and they had locked all the doors in the pharmacy and the exercise place, so you couldn't. I said, why are we walking here? Well, there's no exit here. We're safe. They can't run away out the side. And I said, well, how far are we going to go? Well, you decide whenever you're tired or whatever. And we walked along, and this bitchiness kept on going between the big one and the little one. The other 2 were very quiet and didn't say a word, and we were happy about looking out a window occasionally. And finally, the big one, the 6-footer, hit a can of sand on the side, which had been placed there for people with cigarettes. You put the cigarettes into the sand, and that's how you get rid of the cigarettes. She threw that can down ahead of us, and here's the sand all over the place. I'm on crutches with one leg wrapped up and the other one working pretty well. And I said, stop, everybody stop. And they did. I was happy about that, because if I had gone into that sand, those crutches would have been gone. They're slipped right out of there. And I said, turn around, everybody turn around. And we started back. Pat says, okay. And Pat took her 2 docile ones up. And I walked between the 2 nasty ones. I didn't know if I was going to get slugged or attacked or killed or whatever, you know. But they took them back, and we did that once a week with different ladies, different gals, and they never said a word to me. They were getting acquainted with a male, and that was supposed to be helpful for them. Terrible story, but that's what happened. Any other questions? I said we'd have a question period. Everybody understand the whole thing?
They all got it. That's how well you,
Oh,
you want to
yes, Louise. Well, that was tough, and you spend a lot of time at that time, first of all, in repair work, you know. You got to get all the shrapnel out. The first time they got me out of bed, I stepped on the floor, and the ball of my foot just killed me. So they picked up the ball of the foot, and they found there was a cut in it, and there was a piece of shrapnel in there. So you take this shrapnel out about once a week, you know, they're pulling this stuff out. I still have 7 pieces of shrapnel in my body, 3 on one side and 2 on the other, 4 on the other. So, well, yeah, they put you through a lot of exercises because you got to get strong enough. And I had lost a lot of weight, obviously. The one dirty thing is the morphine addiction. And that is tough. Morphine, they kept giving me shots on the airplanes every time I wiggled and did something bad with them. But the morphine addiction ended when I got to Bushnell General at Utah. The nurse was a nurse Quine, tall lady. She said, "We're going to cure your addiction. We have to cure it." And she said, "We'll lock the door, and every 2 hours, 2 hours you will, 2 hours you'll have somebody come in. Otherwise, you'll tough it out until you're cured of your addiction." So I said, "Well, what if I have to go to the bathroom?" They said, "We'll be very happy about this if you have to go to the bathroom." I had not gone for a bowel movement for 3 weeks. And it's a doggone morphine, you know. So anyway, we did every two hours. Somebody came in, and they hated to come in because I was in bad shape and angry and unhappy, and went on, you know, and it took me about 5 or 6 days before I finally got improved. Got to the bathroom, did my thing, and treatment was no morphine ever. And I haven't had any since. Yeah. Any other questions?
So the question, Mr. Schwantes, the question was, where did you get your prosthesis?
Where did they, right there, down the hall from Ward 16, where we all were, there's a whole bunch, about 20 of us wounded, and all amputees or with burns. And down the hallway was a repair shop. And they would take you down there and measure and see how you're coming along. Could you handle this repair work and what they're going to test? And it was with a wooden leg. They began with a chunk of wood, and they hollowed it out, and they took pictures of your stump and what you had left, and they made it the best they could. I, in my typical 19, 20-year-old view of myself being hotshot stuff, you know, I said, "Don't worry about that. When I get that first leg, I'm going to walk up here to Ward 16 and show you the leg." It damn near killed me. It didn't fit, it didn't work, it didn't do a darn thing. And but I made it up there, and I hollered, and they all came and looked at that hunk of wood that I was walking in. And I went back, and sat there for about an hour until I could recover from that stupid comment I made about, I'll see you when I'm done with this repair work, you know. But it took a long time to do that, and you kept running into things like infections from the shrapnel. In 2010, I had an infection at that late date in the hip, and the dang thing was about 6 inches deep in that hip. And they had to go in and get the piece of metal out, and it was metal along with some powder, must have been gunpowder or something. Usually those pieces went in and got encapsulated with like your nose bone, you know, and that meant that it was not going to get infected, but here it was 2010 and I had to go. It took me 2 months to recover from that because you have to heal it from the inside up and out. Bad. Don't do it. Don't do it that way. Please don't do it.
Back to the prosthesis. I understand you used to go to visit schools and talk to young kids. They were always fascinated by the.
Well, yes, and there was be a class like this, and they amaze me because most of the high schools here in town do not have typical rooms. They have people that have lounges and Davenports and all this sort of thing, and the kids would come in and drape themselves all over the place, and I'd explain that I'd get the smallest girl in the front row to please come up because I carried a red suitcase. And I'd say, now, this is my remnant from World War II. And I promise you it will not explode. I'm sure it won't explode. And I want this young lady to open this and hold it up so you can all see it. Well, it was an extra wooden leg, you know, that she'd come up scared to death, you know, and take the whole. And then they all wanted to try the doggone prosthesis on, you know, which is okay, you try it, and you can't do it anyway. But that was very effective with them. Yes.
So
Sure, absolutely. Did I suffer PTSD? Yes, this comes up in every conversation we have. And PTSD is okay. One dream is walking up in the snow from the time we lost a tank, and we lost 4 tanks during that time, and I had a friend who got shot. I picked him up and carried him up in the snow and brought him to the medical center. And they said, thank you for doing that, but he has died. He's died on you. So that's the kind of dream that you keep on for 30 years, you know, it keeps popping up. And the others all relate to other incidents that came up and things that you can't do. I can't walk through the snow. You know, you dream you are walking and walking and you can't get there. So those are all PTSD things. The ones about shooting people and that sort of thing was not so much. It didn't. You finally got to the point where I had to go tell a little girl in the dining room, Teresa, that we had in order to shoot all the horses in Belgium because the Germans used the horses to tow out their equipment. And so I thought that was a bad order, but the word came down, shoot the horse first. And I shot lots of horses, and you feel terrible about that. That's a bad thing, you know. But hey, that's war. Have you heard enough about war yet? Huh? Yes, Mary?
As a vet, that you've been treated well the rest of your life in terms of the medical care.
Oh, yes, I do. I have medical care all over the place and both private and always a fallback on the VA. VA doesn't do everything perfectly and they sure have had their problems, but they're needed. And I did not rely on them. I figured you better be tough enough and shape up and do your own thing. And if you didn't, you had lots of trouble. So, but anything else?
You free of pain now?
Never, never. The dang thing is always a problem. If you haven't got a pain at the end of it, you get cramps. Your muscles are used to moving that foot down there, and if you move it too much, you get a cramp up in your thigh, don't you? You say, how did that happen? Well, because the foot is trying to, I feel the foot every day, the toes every day, and that helps with walking. You got to figure the worst thing I can do is stand up and forget that I have a leg and not strap it on tight and walk away. And I've done that twice. And you fall right on your rear end and that stump goes into the bottom. That fixes you up for about 2 months, to let that heal up. So it's, yes.
You interact with Pat at all?
No, we were close to him. I was in the First Army and he was in the Third Army. He was a superb armored man. But in the First Army, we were one of the few armored divisions, and mostly it was infantry at that stage. The one that got destroyed in the Battle of the Bulge was the 106th Division, and it was brand new people who had never been in war. And the other system they used was what I was involved with, replacement. They replaced 5 guys out of 10, and somebody was there who knew what the heck they were doing, and 5 guys had to learn. In that group, they lost 18,000 people to the prison camps when the Germans came through. They just flat were not ready for this sort of problem. Don't tell anybody in the Army that, they get mad about you. But the 106th Division number has never been used since that disaster. Anything else? You've been a great audience and you put up with me.
All right.